The stench of fresh manure slammed me like a brick the second I stepped back onto the ranch. The HOA president swore it was completely vacant. After 2 years away, I returned to find 200 cattle and horses grazing across my inherited land like they owned it. For those 2 years, smug HOA Queen Vivian Ashworth secretly ran her animal sanctuary scam right here, charging $500 adoption fees, pocketing donations with my address, claiming tax breaks in my name, turning Grandpa's legacy into her personal $250,000 money-printing machine. I confronted her on the spot. She sneered,
"You're trespassing, Mr. McNeil. This is protected sanctuary land now."
I smiled cold.
Vivian, hope you love spending my money, because tomorrow the sheriff, IRS, and my lawyers show up. You're paying every cent back plus triple damages, interest, and your freedom.
Just wait. I'm gonna make her pay dearly. Someone stole your inheritance while you were gone? What's the first thing you do? Drop it in the comments. Best revenge ideas get shouted out next video. The divorce cost me everything except Grandpa's ranch. And thank God Linda's lawyers couldn't touch that. After 20 years building electrical systems for millionaires who treated me like furniture, I was starting over at 52 with nothing but calloused hands, a toolbox older than most people's cars, and exactly $847 in my checking account. I'm Garrett McNeil, master electrician, recently divorced, and the proud new owner of 40 acres of Texas hill country that I'd inherited but never had time to visit. Sunset Ridge Ranch, 1940s farmhouse, vintage barn, and more land than I knew what to do with. My plan was simple. Renovate the house, maybe raise some cattle, and forget Linda ever existed. That lasted exactly 3 days. The sound of gravel crunching under designer heels announced my first visitor. Vivian Ashworth stepped out of a white Tesla with community vanity plates, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. At 58, she had that suburban queen vibe. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, and the kind of fake smile that meant trouble. "Mr. McNeil? I'm Vivian Ashworth, president of Lakeside Estates HOA. She handed me a violation notice on letterhead that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. We need to discuss your property's compliance issues. The notice listed every building on my land, unsightly structures, Grandpa's barn, inappropriate vehicle storage, my work truck, failure to maintain landscaping standards, natural Texas grassland. Daily fines, $250 until corrected. At my income level, that was financial suicide in 2 weeks. "Ma'am, I'm not in your HOA, I said, wiping sawdust off my hands. "This ranch predates your subdivision by decades." Her smile turned cold as January morning. "Mr. McNeil, people like you don't understand community standards. Your situation is bringing down property values for homes worth over $800,000. We can't have working-class eyesores disrupting our neighborhood aesthetic." The smell of fresh lumber mixed with my cooling coffee as she strutted back to her Tesla. The texture of hot asphalt under my work boots contrasted sharply with the click of her designer heels. I stood there holding that flimsy notice, watching morning mist roll across my back pastures, 40 acres I hadn't even walked yet. That evening, my neighbor Betty Kowalski shuffled over with homemade pierogies and neighborhood intelligence. At 78, she'd survived 3 husbands and 5 decades of suburban warfare. "That Ashworth woman's been asking questions about your property," Betty warned, settling into Grandpa's old porch chair. "Wanted to know if it was properly secured, and if you were actually living here full-time." I told her the only thing needing security was her mouth with a roll of duct tape. Vivian was a former real estate lawyer turned community activist, professional busybody with legal teeth. Her husband Robert sat on the county planning commission, which explained her inside knowledge of zoning changes. Together, they'd turned Lakeside Estates HOA into their personal kingdom, targeting anyone who didn't fit their upper-class vision. She tried to fine the Martinez family for Rose's food truck being commercial vehicle storage, Betty continued. And Jim Patterson got cited for his flagpole being non-conforming height, a veteran, flying the American flag. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't discover for weeks, was that while Vivian harassed me about property standards, she'd been treating my back 40 like her personal business venture. Those pastures I hadn't explored yet, they weren't as empty as they looked from the house. I filed that violation notice in the kitchen drawer next to Grandpa's survey maps, figuring I'd deal with Vivian's power trip after I finished rewiring the house and scraping together enough cash to survive her fines. Biggest mistake I ever made was underestimating that woman. While I focused on fixing what I could see, she was building an empire in the parts of my property I'd never bothered to check. The sound of cattle lowing drifted across the evening air, distant enough that I dismissed it as neighbors' livestock. If I'd investigated that sound, this whole story would have ended very differently. Vivian didn't waste time declaring war. 3 days after our first meeting, a certified letter arrived with the county seal, official as a heart attack and twice as scary. The envelope felt thick between my fingers, loaded with legal jargon designed to intimidate working folks into submission. Inside was a formal complaint, claiming my ranch violated rural residential zoning compatibility standards. The letter demanded I appear before something called the Lakeside Property Standards Committee within 10 days. Committee members: Dale Hutchins, mortgage broker; Rex Pullman, contractor; and guess who as chairwoman? Vivian fucking Ashworth. These people had appointed themselves judge, jury, and executioner of my property rights. The real kicker was an obscure county ordinance they dug up requiring structures over 50 years old to pass modern safety inspections before being considered legally habitable. Grandpa's barn was built in 1963. His farmhouse? 1947. Both needed $8,000 worth of inspections, plus an estimated $45,000 in mandatory safety improvements. The smell of morning bacon grease filled my kitchen as I read that financial death sentence. My divorce had left me with exactly $847 in checking, and a credit card I was afraid to use. This wasn't about safety. This was deliberate warfare designed to bankrupt me into selling. But Vivian picked the wrong electrician to intimidate. 20 years of reading building codes and permit applications had taught me that bureaucrats love their paperwork, and paperwork cuts both ways. I remembered an old contractor telling me, "Kid, agricultural land plays by different rules. Government can't touch a working farm." I drove to the county records office and spent 6 hours digging through dusty file cabinets that reeked of old cigarettes and broken dreams. What I found was pure gold. My property had agricultural exemption status dating back to 1962. As long as land was actively used for farming or ranching, most zoning restrictions didn't apply. Even better, Vivian's Property Standards Committee had zero legal authority over agricultural land. They were basically a book club with delusions of grandeur. I filed a counter-complaint about HOA harassment and called my insurance company about liability coverage. Then I installed 4 security cameras around the property perimeter after noticing fresh tire tracks near my back gate, tracks with a distinctive dual-wheel pattern that definitely didn't come from my single-axle pickup. Rosa Martinez stopped by that afternoon with lunch from her food truck, bringing carnitas tacos that smelled like heaven and gossip that proved invaluable. "Garrett, that woman tried to ban me from the farmer's market for disrupting community aesthetics," she said, settling onto my porch steps. "She's got this obsession with keeping undesirable elements away from her precious neighborhood." The texture of weathered wood creaked under our weight as Rosa shared more intelligence. Vivian had targeted 3 other property owners in the past year, all working-class folks who couldn't afford legal fights. All had eventually sold their land at below-market prices to developers with mysterious connections to the Lakeside Estates Board. That evening, while organizing Grandpa's papers by lamplight, I found something that changed the entire game. Original survey maps showing my property line extended 200 feet further east than I'd realized. The Lakeside Estates community garden that Vivian constantly bragged about on Nextdoor was actually built on my land. I traced those boundary lines with my finger, feeling the old paper crack slightly under pressure. The community garden included an expensive greenhouse, automatic irrigation system, and raised beds where residents grew organic vegetables for the weekly farmers market. Vivian charged monthly plot rental fees and took a percentage of all produce sales, probably thousands per year in pure profit, on property she didn't own. My electrician's training kicked in as I studied the irrigation setup through my new security cameras. Those weren't just garden hoses. This was a professional system with timers, sensors, and underground lines that must have cost $15,000 to install. Someone had invested serious money in infrastructure on my land, which explained why they were so desperate to force me out. The next morning, Betty Kowalski shuffled over with intelligence that made my coffee taste even better. That Ashworth woman knocked on my door, asking if your ranch was properly secured against livestock wandering, Betty reported, lowering herself into Grandpa's old porch chair with a satisfied grunt. I told her the only livestock wandering around here was her, and maybe she should get herself properly secured with a muzzle and a leash. Betty's sandpaper laugh echoed off the barn walls as I started connecting dots. Livestock wandering? I'd been hearing cattle sounds at night, but dismissed them as neighbors' animals. What if they weren't neighbors' cattle at all? That night, I sat on the porch, listening to sounds I'd been ignoring for weeks. Regular cattle lowing in the distance, too consistent and too close to be random. The occasional whinny of horses carrying across the evening air. Sounds that seemed to drift from my own back pastures. 40 acres I still hadn't fully explored. Vivian's harassment campaign was just the opening move. She wanted me gone desperately. But why? What was happening on my worthless land that made it worth risking legal trouble to steal? Vivian escalated like a wildfire in August wind. At 6:30 a.m. sharp, City Inspector Jake Morrison pounded on my door with the enthusiasm of a bill collector and twice the attitude. Anonymous reports about unpermitted electrical work, he announced, clipboard in hand and truck engines still running. The morning air reeked of diesel exhaust, mixed with fresh dew on grass, the smell of bureaucratic harassment served before breakfast. I knew exactly who'd made those anonymous reports. Vivian was fishing for violations, hoping to find ammunition where her fake committee had failed. Morrison spent 2 hours crawling through every inch of my electrical systems, looking for code violations that didn't exist. 20 years of experience doesn't lie, and everything I'd installed was textbook perfect. He left empty-handed, but promised return visits if more concerns arose. By noon, my phone exploded with next-door notifications. Vivian had posted a manifesto about dangerous property conditions and uncooperative neighbors threatening community safety. She'd included photos of my ranch taken from multiple angles, clear evidence of trespassing, claiming I created fire hazards and environmental risks. The comment section turned into a lynch mob. Neighbors who'd never set foot on my property suddenly had expert opinions about my negligence. A few brave souls defended me, but Vivian's army of suburban warriors drowned them out with righteous indignation. That evening brought a new level of harassment. Cars driving slowly past my entrance in organized shifts. Passengers snapped photos through windows while drivers maintained casual speeds. Vivian had weaponized her neighborhood safety patrol into a surveillance operation. The constant crunch of gravel under tires became my new soundtrack. But I wasn't rolling over. Rosa's cousin, Deputy Martinez, had taught me the value of documentation. Build a paper trail, Garrett. Harassment always escalates, and when it does, you need evidence that holds up in court. I started connecting with other HOA victims across the county, discovering Vivian's systematic targeting of anyone who didn't fit her vision. Jim Patterson fought citations for his non-conforming flagpole, a veteran being harassed for flying Old Glory. The Hendersons got fined for planting native Texas wildflowers instead of imported grass. Mrs. Juliet received violations for culturally inappropriate garden decorations that had been in her family for 3 generations. Thursday evenings became strategy sessions at my kitchen table. I offered free electrical work to anyone facing HOA retaliation. Jim provided security training from his Army days. Rosa brought homemade tamales and the kind of moral support that tastes like victory with extra hot sauce. During electrical work at Rosa's house, I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. Through the thin walls, Vivian's voice carried from next door. Expansion plans are ahead of schedule. We can handle 50 more head before winter sets in. My wire strippers froze in my hand. More head? Of what? Adoption fees exceeded projections this quarter, she continued. Tax exemption paperwork is processing smoothly. Thank God nobody's been back there since the old man passed. We've got months before anyone gets curious. The old man, Grandpa, back there. My unexplored pastures. Every puzzle piece slammed into place like a sledgehammer to the skull. the tire tracks, the night traffic, the livestock sounds I'd been dismissing. Vivian wasn't just harassing me, she was using my land for something that generated adoption fees and tax exemptions. Rosa noticed my expression. "Honey, you look like someone walked on your grave." "Maybe they did," I whispered, suddenly understanding why Vivian would risk legal trouble to force me out. That night, I studied Google Earth satellite images of my property with new eyes. The photos were 18 months old, but clear geometric patterns marked my back pastures, fencing, structures, and organized clearings that screamed commercial operation. From my barn roof the next morning, high-powered binoculars revealed the truth that changed everything. Movement in my distant pastures that definitely wasn't wildlife. Large animals in organized groups, temporary buildings, water systems, feed storage, a full-scale livestock operation on land I'd never walked, generating income I'd never seen, using my address for tax benefits I'd never claimed. The scope hit me like cold water in the face. Vivian hadn't stumbled onto my property by accident. She'd been planning this takeover for years, waiting for Grandpa to die, so she could expand her illegal empire without interference. Standing on that roof, watching my stolen inheritance graze peacefully in stolen pastures, I realized Vivian Ashworth had made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd picked a fight with someone who knew how to wire buildings from the ground up, and taking apart her operation would require the same methodical precision. The question wasn't what she was hiding anymore. The question was how much she'd stolen, how long she'd been stealing it, and how completely I could destroy her when the time came for payback. Vivian arrived with a lawyer, and the stench of desperation masquerading as expensive perfume. Bradley Whitman unfolded from a black Mercedes like a praying mantis in a $3,000 suit, carrying briefcases that probably cost more than my truck. "Mr. McNeil, immediate environmental violations require emergency intervention," Whitman announced, shoving documents thick as a dictionary into my hands. The paper felt slick and cold, loaded with accusations of groundwater contamination, illegal waste disposal, and unauthorized agricultural operations threatening public safety. They were demanding cessation of all farming activities within 72 hours and threatening EPA involvement. The legal fees alone would bankrupt me before I could fight back. Furthermore, Vivian added with practiced concern, county planning has expedited eminent domain proceedings. Underutilized properties that could serve community development take priority over individual ownership rights. Eminent domain. Government-sanctioned theft wrapped in bureaucratic ribbon. That afternoon, my union buddy Danny launched his drone from behind my barn, the quiet electric motors barely audible above the wind through mesquite trees. His 4K footage revealed an operation that stopped my heart cold. Over 200 head of livestock scattered across my back 20 acres, like a commercial ranch. Professional feed silos, veterinary facilities, water systems with underground pipes, and temporary barns organized with military precision. Infrastructure worth hundreds of thousands, built with serious money and long-term planning. But here's what made my blood freeze. They'd installed permanent fencing, not temporary panels, actual steel posts cemented into my ground. Someone had invested in making this operation permanent, treating my inheritance like their personal kingdom. The hidden access road carved through neighboring property bypassed my entrance entirely, connecting to farm roads I'd never known existed. This wasn't opportunistic trespassing. This was strategic conquest, planned and executed while I was fighting divorce lawyers and rebuilding my life. Evening brought the real gut punch. Online property records revealed Lakeside Animal Sanctuary, claiming 501c3 status, with my geographic coordinates listed as their operational address. 2 years of financial filings showed $180,000 in donations and adoption fees, income generated on my land while they called it vacant wasteland. But the smoking gun was Vivian's personal guarantee on liability insurance for property she didn't own. Her signature on federal tax documents, claiming my land as her nonprofit's base of operations. Legal fraud documented in triplicate with government stamps. I was printing evidence when emergency calls started flooding in. Jim Patterson's voice cracked with rage. They didn't just cut my flagpole cables. They filled the base with concrete mix. 30 years flying Old Glory, and they tried to destroy it permanently. Rosa called from her disabled food truck. Anonymous complaint got my commercial license revoked. 15 years of perfect health scores, and suddenly I'm a public menace who needs immediate removal from food service. Mrs. Juliet sobbed through her report. Building inspector condemned my garden shed as structurally unsound. Same shed my late husband built that passed inspection last month. Vivian was scorching earth around everyone connected to me, but she'd made a critical mistake. Every vindictive attack created documented evidence of coordinated harassment. Police reports, witness statements, digital trails, an unshakable pattern of retaliation that any prosecutor would love. The attacks escalated into personal territory. Jim found his truck keyed with the word traitor. Rose's tires got slashed at 3 different locations. Someone reported Mrs. Juliet to immigration services, a naturalized citizen for 30 years suddenly facing deportation threats. But while Vivian focused on terrorizing my allies, she missed what I was doing in my barn every night. Installing industrial-grade surveillance equipment powered by backup systems she couldn't sabotage. Cameras with night vision, motion detection, and cellular upload that documented every person, every vehicle, every criminal act on my property. That evening, I found Grandpa's journal and discovered why Vivian was so desperate to claim this specific land. His careful handwriting described underground springs that fed both the main house and back pastures. Water rights worth millions in drought-prone Texas. Water that legally belonged to me, but had been powering her illegal operation for years. Water is life in this country, Grandpa had written. Whoever controls the water controls everything else. Protect these springs, boy. People have killed for less. The metallic taste of adrenaline filled my mouth as I realized the true scope of Vivian's theft. She hadn't just stolen my land, she'd stolen my water rights to power a massive livestock operation that generated 6-figure profits annually. Then she'd tried to force me out through legal harassment while positioning herself to buy the property at auction for pennies on the dollar. Sitting in that kitchen where 4 generations of my family had made honest livings, I understood that Vivian Ashworth had declared war on the wrong bloodline. She wanted to play dirty? Time to show her what dirty really looked like. The courthouse smelled like old cigarettes and crushed dreams when I made the discovery that changed everything. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, buried in property records that hadn't seen daylight in decades, I found the document that would destroy Vivian Ashworth's life. Her precious Lakeside Estates HOA was completely fake. No legal filing with the county, no recorded covenants, no notarized restrictions. For 2 years, Vivian had been operating a pretend authority with 0 legal standing, terrorizing neighbors with citations that carried the same weight as grocery lists. But that revelation was just foreplay. The main event made my coffee cup tremble in my hands as I photographed evidence that would make federal prosecutors salivate. Robert Ashworth, county planning commissioner and Vivian's devoted husband, had been rubber stamping every development permit his wife needed. Zoning variances that normally took months, approved overnight. Environmental exemptions for lake access, fast-tracked without review. Construction permits for resort development, signed before applications were even completed. The paper trail revealed their master plan in sickening detail. Force me out through fake legal harassment, have the county declare my property abandoned, then purchase my $2.3 million ranch at tax auction for maybe $200,000. My inheritance would become the crown jewel of their lakeside resort and conference center, a $50 million development that would make them multimillionaires. Without my central 40 acres, their empire collapsed. No lake access, no water rights, no underground springs to power large-scale development. My property wasn't just valuable, it was irreplaceable. But Vivian's illegal sanctuary operation had given me weapons she never saw coming. Federal tax fraud through false nonprofit claims, criminal charges plus $200,000 plus in penalties, operating commercial business without permits, $50,000 per violation across multiple agencies, environmental crimes from improper waste management, EPA fines that could bankrupt small nations, theft of services and criminal trespassing, felony charges with prison time. The beautiful irony? Her meticulous record-keeping had documented every crime in triplicate. Government filings, insurance claims, tax exemptions, all signed personally by Vivian Ashworth, claiming ownership of property she'd never legally possessed. Instead of just defending myself, I could obliterate her completely. Criminal prosecution, civil lawsuits, public humiliation, and financial destruction, all served with government stamps and notarized signatures. But late-night surveillance through my barn windows had revealed complications that made this fight more than simple revenge. Volunteers genuinely caring for rescued animals, horses with healing injuries from neglect cases, cattle saved from abandonment, goats that had nowhere else to go. Some of these creatures needed legitimate sanctuary, and destroying Vivian's operation could harm animals that had already suffered enough. The moral complexity transformed this from a property dispute into something deeper, exposing systematic corruption while protecting innocent lives caught in the crossfire. Standing in Grandpa's kitchen at 3 a.m., evidence spread across the table like a war plan, I understood the true scope of what I was facing. This wasn't just about one corrupt woman anymore. This was about a network of officials who'd turned public service into personal profit, using government power to steal from working families who couldn't fight back. Vivian had picked the wrong target, but more importantly, she'd created the perfect opportunity to expose corruption that affected the entire county. Other families had lost properties to similar schemes. Other working folks had been terrorized by fake authorities and crooked commissioners. My grandfather's ranch had always been a place where people fought back against corrupt systems. Now it was my turn to carry on that tradition. But the stakes were higher than Grandpa had ever imagined. Vivian wanted to play dirty with government power. Time to show her what happened when working folks had enough evidence to fight back through the system she'd corrupted. Grandpa's kitchen table became my war room, covered in evidence thick enough to choke a courthouse. The smell of strong coffee mixed with the mustiness of decades-old legal papers as I planned the most elaborate takedown in county history. Every document, every photograph, every recording was a weapon aimed straight at Vivian Ashworth's criminal empire. The taste of anticipation was metallic in my mouth as I installed military-grade surveillance equipment that would make NSA agents jealous. Trail cameras with night vision and cellular upload at every access point. Motion-activated floodlights that would turn my back pastures into a Hollywood movie set, and backup power systems that even Vivian's contractor cronies couldn't sabotage. Dr. Sarah Juliet jumped at the chance for professional revenge, disguised as animal welfare assessment. "I've been fighting their harassment of my practice for months," she said, studying my surveillance footage while her fingers traced the outline of illegal structures. "Real rescue operations follow federal protocols. This looks like commercial breeding, using non-profit status to dodge regulations and taxes." The texture of worn napkins crinkled under Maria Santos's pen as she sketched our three-pronged legal attack at Rosa's food truck. Civil rights attorney and HOA specialist, Maria had been waiting years for a case this bulletproof. "Criminal complaint first," she explained, the smell of Rosa's carnitas mixing with diesel exhaust from passing trucks. "Sheriff gets search warrants, freezes assets, starts criminal investigation. That's your immediate protection. Civil lawsuit second, triple damages for theft of income plus property destruction. With $180,000 documented theft, we're looking at $500,000 in recoverable damages. Third, nuclear option, agricultural preservation status with historic designation. Once that's filed, no political pressure can override conservation protection. Their resort dies permanently. My electrician training had taught me that systems fail when you know which wires to cut. County GIS maps provide legally definitive property boundaries, free online and admissible in court. Motion-activated cameras with cellular upload create tamper-proof evidence that can't be lost or destroyed. Agricultural exemptions protect even hobby farming from HOA harassment. A few chickens or vegetable rows can shield entire properties. But the beautiful trap was Vivian's own paperwork. She'd signed nonprofit documents and insurance policies as an individual, not corporate representative. Every asset she owned, Tesla, house, investment accounts, was vulnerable to seizure for court judgments. The woman threatening to bankrupt me had accidentally exposed her entire fortune to the same tactics. Rosa's weekend property survey party would provide perfect cover for multiple witnesses documenting simultaneously. Her legendary tamales gave us legitimate reason for crowds while we gathered evidence that would destroy Vivian's life. Jim Patterson contributed military planning expertise and night vision equipment that turned darkness into advantage. Coordinated documentation from multiple angles prevents evidence tampering claims, he explained, while calibrating cameras with practiced precision. We hit them with overwhelming proof from every direction. Betty Kowalski weaponized her bridge club into concerned citizens, demanding answers at county meetings. 70-year-old church ladies asking pointed questions about corruption carry more political weight than lawyers with briefcases. Their gray hair was armor that made them politically untouchable. Deputy Martinez couldn't officially help, but agreed to patrol nearby during our operation. The sound of gravel under his tires would be our signal that backup was 30 seconds away if Vivian's crew turned violent. The financial destruction would be total. Civil damages plus treble penalties could exceed $500,000. Criminal charges carried prison time and permanent criminal records. Public exposure would end their political careers and social standing forever. But timing was everything. Saturday's evidence gathering coincided perfectly with Lakeside Estates' annual meeting, where Vivian planned to unveil resort development plans. While she pitched prosperity built on stolen land, we'd document the criminal empire funding her dreams. Teresa Gonzalez from the community newspaper would receive anonymous tips about unusual ranch activity. Local media coverage would prevent authorities from burying the story or giving Vivian time to destroy evidence. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Every crime Vivian had committed was documented in government records she'd filed personally. Every theft was photographed by her own security cameras. Every fraud was recorded in financial statements bearing her signature. I sat in Grandpa's chair as evening shadows crept across evidence that would reshape county politics forever. The creak of old wood under my weight sounded like approval from generations of my family who'd fought corrupt systems on this same land. Grandpa had always said the best way to catch a thief was to let them steal enough rope to hang themselves. Vivian Ashworth had been weaving that rope for 2 years, documenting every crime, recording every conversation, preserving every piece of evidence that would destroy her. Tomorrow night, we'd spring the trap she'd built with her own hands. The woman who'd terrorized my neighbors, stolen my inheritance, and corrupted my county government was about to learn what happened when working folks had enough evidence to fight back. Time to cut the right wires and watch her empire burn. Vivian's desperation exploded like a meth lab at 5:47 a.m. Thursday morning. Rex Pullman's emergency utility crew arrived with hydraulic cutters and official work orders that looked genuine enough to fool God himself. I watched through my kitchen window as they systematically destroyed 20 years of electrical work, severing main power lines in showers of sparks that lit up the pre-dawn darkness like the 4th of July. The acrid smell of burning copper mixed with diesel exhaust as my entire property went black. "Emergency safety shutdown," Rex announced when I confronted him, waving county documents that bore forged signatures but official letterhead. "Your unpermitted wiring creates fire hazards for the entire neighborhood. Power stays off until professional inspection confirms compliance." The timing was surgical precision. No electricity meant no security cameras, no floodlights, no evidence collection during tomorrow's planned operation. Vivian was blinding me before her final assault. But she'd underestimated a master electrician's paranoia. Hidden backup generators hummed to life automatically, powering surveillance systems from battery banks she couldn't detect. While pretending devastation, I recorded Rex's crew deliberately destroying infrastructure and caught his admission on hidden microphones. "This is criminal sabotage," I told him, making sure my audio equipment captured every word. Rex's laugh sounded like concrete mixing with broken glass. "Prove it, McNeil. County maintenance records will show legitimate safety repairs." By noon, the psychological warfare escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. Vivian filed emergency restraining orders, claiming I'd threatened volunteer safety, and demanded court injunctions preventing me from accessing my own back pastures. The legal papers were fantasy, but they'd bog me down in hearings for weeks. Dale Hutchins arrived with foreclosure threats wrapped in fake concern, settling onto my porch like he was measuring it for his own furniture. "Property tax liens accumulate interest daily," he explained with practiced sympathy. "Current violations plus penalties require immediate payment of $63,000. Banks don't negotiate payment plans for problem properties." The metallic taste of pure rage flooded my mouth. These bastards had turned every government office into weapons for theft, corrupting public servants into private enforcers for their criminal empire. But while Vivian dismantled my defenses through official channels, she'd missed my midnight activities in the darkened barn, installing military-grade surveillance equipment powered by hidden systems she couldn't sabotage, satellite-linked cameras that uploaded evidence to servers 3 states away, beyond her reach or influence. The real horror began that evening. Rosa called with a voice that shook with controlled fury. Miguel got deported. ICE raided his restaurant based on anonymous tips about undocumented workers. He's been legal for 8 years, Garrett. They destroyed his life over a phone call. Jim Patterson's report arrived minutes later. A launched benefits review questioning my service-connected disabilities. 20 years of consistent medical records, and suddenly they're claiming my combat injuries are fraudulent. Mrs. Juliet sobbed through her update. Property taxes tripled overnight. Same house, same condition, but assessment jumped $400,000. I can't pay the increase. They're forcing me to sell. Vivian was weaponizing federal agencies against my allies, using government power to destroy anyone who'd helped me investigate her crimes. But her desperate attacks were creating an evidence trail so obvious that even corrupt officials couldn't explain it away. The breaking point came Friday night, when Deputy Martinez brought intelligence that changed everything. His cigarette smoke mixed with humid evening air as he delivered news that made my blood freeze. Federal environmental inspectors are scheduled for random county visits starting Monday, he explained, glancing nervously at shadows that might contain listening devices. If they find her unpermitted animal operation, EPA fines will be in the millions. She's got 72 hours to legitimize everything or face federal prison. 72 hours. That explained the sudden desperation, the sabotage, the coordinated attacks on my support network. Vivian wasn't just harassing me anymore. She was racing against federal deadlines that would expose her crimes regardless of my investigation. But here's what made my hands shake with anticipation. Her panic was forcing exactly the mistakes I'd been hoping for. Every attack on my allies created documented retaliation. Every bogus inspection generated paper trails connecting back to my investigation of her operation. Saturday's evidence gathering would happen during peak chaos. Vivian's desperation had reached critical mass. Federal inspectors would arrive in 48 hours, and her criminal empire was hemorrhaging evidence faster than she could destroy it. The full-scale assault began at dawn. Vivian herself showed up with a convoy of trucks, contractors, and what looked like a small army of volunteers, frantically dismantling her illegal sanctuary operation. The sound of hydraulic equipment mixed with panicked shouting as they tried to erase 2 years of criminal activity in one weekend. But desperation makes people sloppy. From my hidden position in the barn loft, I watched Rex Pullman directing crews to dump animal waste directly into my creek, a federal environmental crime that would trigger EPA enforcement regardless of other charges. Dr. Juliet's hidden cameras captured every violation as they poisoned waterways that fed into the county's drinking supply. "Load the breeding stock first," I heard Vivian shouting through the chaos. "Leave the old animals. Claim they wandered onto the property from neighboring farms." Breeding stock. She was abandoning sick and elderly animals while evacuating the profitable ones that generated adoption fees. The casual cruelty confirmed everything I'd suspected about her fake charity operation. My phone buzzed with coordinated updates from our surveillance network. Jim Patterson reported trucks moving through 3 different access roads, suggesting multiple illegal entry points I hadn't discovered. Rose's food truck position at the main road documented license plates of every vehicle entering or leaving my property. But Vivian's most desperate move came at noon. She arrived with Bradley Whitman and a team of lawyers carrying what looked like emergency court orders. The smell of expensive leather briefcases mixed with dust and diesel as they marched toward my farmhouse like an invasion force. "Mr. McNeil, federal court has granted emergency injunctive relief," Whitman announced, waving documents that still smelled like fresh ink. "You are hereby prohibited from interfering with established agricultural operations, pending resolution of property boundary disputes." Emergency injunctive relief. Filed in federal court on a Saturday, approved by a judge she'd probably bribed, designed to prevent me from stopping their evidence destruction. The legal system had become her personal weapon for protecting criminal activity. Furthermore, Vivian added with triumph poisoning her voice, county environmental assessment has determined that disrupting established animal sanctuary operations would constitute ecological damage, requiring immediate federal intervention. They'd turned my own environmental protections against me, claiming that stopping their illegal operation would harm the animals they'd been exploiting. The irony was breathtaking, using animal welfare laws to protect animal abuse. But while they served fake court orders, our coordinated documentation operation was capturing everything. Hidden cameras recorded every conversation, every criminal act, every piece of evidence they thought they were destroying. Satellite uplinks transmitted real-time footage to cloud servers they couldn't hack or subpoena. The afternoon brought Vivian's final desperate gambit, personal bribery disguised as negotiation. She visited my porch with a cashier's check for $750,000, nearly twice what I'd paid for divorce lawyers, claiming it was a generous settlement offer for property damage and emotional distress. "Garrett, let's be reasonable," she said, her voice honey-sweet with underlying venom. "You're a working man who deserves compensation for this unfortunate misunderstanding. Take the money, sign a confidentiality agreement, and everyone wins." $750,000. More money than I'd see in 5 years of electrical work. Enough to rebuild my life somewhere far from county corruption and HOA harassment. The temptation was real, financial security in exchange for letting criminals escape justice. But I thought about Mrs. Juliet facing foreclosure, Miguel deported for helping me, Jim Patterson's VA benefits under review. How many other working families had suffered while Vivian built her empire? How many more would suffer if I took the money and ran? "Vivian, that's a generous offer," I said, making sure my hidden microphones captured every word. "But I've got a counter-proposal. Pack up your criminal operation, turn yourself into federal authorities, and maybe I won't press charges for bribing a witness in a federal investigation." Her face transformed from fake sweetness to pure hatred, faster than lightning strike. "You stubborn fool. Do you have any idea who you're fighting? My husband controls county development. I have connections that reach the state capitol. We can destroy your life with a phone call." "Maybe," I replied, watching trucks continue their frantic evacuation in the distance. "But federal prison don't care much about state connections. And tomorrow morning, every news station in Texas is getting video evidence of your operation." Vivian's mask finally slipped completely. "You think you've won something here? Even if you expose this, there are a dozen other properties we're developing, other families to relocate, other problems to solve. You're just one stubborn asshole standing in the way of progress." There it was. Admission that my ranch was part of a larger conspiracy, targeting working-class property owners across multiple counties. Her desperation had forced confession to crimes I hadn't even suspected. Sunday evening arrived with the weight of Judgment Day pressing down on lakeside estates like humidity before a thunderstorm. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the community center, where Vivian planned to unveil her resort development proposal. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 72 hours turning her triumphant presentation into the most public downfall in county history. At exactly 6:45 p.m., I triggered the coordinated evidence reveal that would destroy her life forever. Hidden floodlights illuminated my back pastures like a football stadium, revealing the full scope of her illegal sanctuary operation to everyone gathered for the meeting. The blazing lights could be seen from the community center parking lot, drawing confused stares from arriving residents. Dr. Juliet's animal welfare inspection was already in progress, documenting conditions that would trigger federal intervention. Deputy Martinez arrived with search warrants based on criminal complaints I'd filed that afternoon. Teresa Gonzalez from the community newspaper brought television crews who'd been alerted to breaking news about county corruption. But the real show was happening inside the community center, where 150-plus homeowners had gathered to hear Vivian's vision for their property values. I entered through the back door just as she was presenting architectural renderings of the Lakeside Resort and Conference Center, a $50 million development that required my stolen land to access lake frontage. As you can see, Vivian explained to the captivated audience, pointing to detailed plans, this world-class resort will triple our property values while creating hundreds of jobs for the local economy. That's when I connected my laptop to the projection system and interrupted her presentation with live footage from my property. The screen filled with real-time video of 200-plus animals scattered across land she just claimed was vacant and underutilized for development purposes. The audience gasped as drone cameras revealed temporary barns, feed storage, veterinary facilities, and water systems worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Professional infrastructure built on property she'd been calling worthless for 2 years. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, standing in the back of the room as 150 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Meet the real Lakeside Development Project. For 2 years, Vivian Ashworth has been running a $250,000 animal sanctuary business on my inherited ranch while telling you it was empty land that needed proper development. I clicked to financial records showing $180,000 in adoption fees and donations collected using my property address, tax exemption claims filed in my name without permission, insurance policies covering operations on land she didn't own. Every dollar came from my stolen property while she sued me for failing to maintain community standards, I continued, watching her face drain of color like someone had pulled a plug. The woman lecturing you about property values has been committing federal tax fraud for profit. The crowd erupted in confused shouting as homeowners realized their HOA president was a criminal. But I wasn't finished destroying her reputation. Here's the beautiful part, I said, advancing to the next slide showing Robert Ashworth's Planning Commission approvals. Her husband has been fast-tracking every permit she needed while drawing a government salary. Zoning variances, environmental exemptions, development permits, all rubber-stamped by the county official who benefits directly from the approvals. The screen filled with documented evidence of the corruption conspiracy. Forged documents, fraudulent filings, bribery disguised as consulting fees. 2 years of criminal activity preserved in government records bearing their signatures. Deputy Martinez entered the room with backup officers and federal investigators who'd been coordinating with EPA enforcement. Vivian Ashworth, you're under arrest for federal tax fraud, criminal trespassing, and environmental violations. The handcuffs clicking around her wrists sounded like justice finally arriving after a long journey, but I had one more surprise for the woman who'd threatened to destroy my life. Vivian, I called out as officers led her toward the door. Remember when you said my ranch was empty land that needed development? Well, you were right about one thing. It definitely needed some development. Thanks for helping me develop the most comprehensive criminal case this county has ever seen. The community center erupted in applause as residents realized they'd been living under the thumb of criminals disguised as community leaders. Several homeowners approached me with stories of similar harassment, evidence of a conspiracy that reached beyond just my property. Local television crews captured Vivian's perp walk as she was loaded into federal custody. The resort development died instantly. No permits, no investors, no political protection. Her empire collapsed in real time as news vans broadcast her downfall to 3 counties. Robert Ashworth resigned from the Planning Commission that night via text message, facing federal investigation into public corruption charges. The fake HOA dissolved when homeowners discovered it had no legal authority. But the sweetest moment came when I announced that my property would be converted into a legitimate animal rescue operation, with proper permits, federal oversight, and transparent accounting. The animals Vivian had exploited would finally receive real sanctuary, not the fake charity that had enriched criminals at their expense. 6 months later, Sunset Ridge Ranch had become everything Grandpa would have wanted it to be, a place where justice prevailed and good people helped each other survive corrupt systems. Vivian Ashworth was serving 18 months in federal prison for tax fraud, environmental crimes, and criminal conspiracy. Her personal assets were seized to pay restitution, including the Tesla with "community" plates that now belong to the county fleet. Robert Ashworth faced separate federal charges for public corruption and had been banned from government employment for life. The civil lawsuit settlement covered all my damages plus legal fees, generating enough money to transform the ranch into a legitimate sanctuary operation. Dr. Sarah Juliet became my partner in Sunset Ridge Animal Rescue, providing veterinary care with proper permits, federal oversight, and transparent accounting that actually benefited animals instead of enriching criminals. Our rescue operation became a model for rural animal welfare, partnering with local schools to provide educational programs about property rights, agricultural preservation, and the importance of standing up to corruption. Kids learned to care for rescued horses while understanding how working families protect themselves from government-assisted theft. The Weekend Volunteer Program drew families from 3 counties, creating a community hub that strengthened rural bonds while serving animals that genuinely needed sanctuary. Rose's food truck became a permanent weekend fixture, serving volunteers and visitors while building social connections that made our area stronger. Betty Kowalski's Bridge Club adopted a flock of rescue chickens and helped maintain garden areas that supplied fresh vegetables for volunteer meals. Their Saturday morning egg collection became a beloved ritual that connected multiple generations around shared purpose and honest work. But the most meaningful change was the Sunset Ridge Scholarship we established for local kids interested in agricultural careers, funded by legitimate rescue operation income. The program partnered with community college to provide hands-on learning opportunities, teaching practical skills while honoring the land's historic role in helping people build better lives. Jim Patterson found new purpose training volunteers in property security and legal documentation, sharing military expertise that helped other families protect themselves from HOA harassment. His flagpole flew proudly over rescue operations that represented everything American veterans had fought to defend. Mrs. Juliet's garden became part of our educational program, demonstrating sustainable agriculture techniques while celebrating cultural diversity that made rural communities stronger. Her bamboo fountains provided peaceful sounds that helped traumatized animals recover from neglect and abuse. The broader impact extended far beyond my property. Maria Santos used our case as precedent for similar lawsuits across Texas, helping dozens of families fight HOA harassment and government corruption. Our documentation methods became templates for exposing organized theft disguised as community development. County politics changed dramatically after federal investigations revealed the scope of Planning Commission corruption. New oversight procedures required public hearings for all development permits, preventing future abuse of government power for private profit. Working families gained voice and protection they'd never had before. The agricultural preservation easement permanently protected Sunset Ridge Ranch from development pressure, ensuring that future generations would inherit land dedicated to honest work and community service. No resort, no subdivision, no corruption, just open space where people could raise animals, grow food, and live according to principles that had sustained rural families for generations. Standing on Grandpa's porch at sunset, watching volunteers care for animals while children learned responsibility and adults built lasting friendships, I realized that Vivian Ashworth had accidentally given me the greatest gift imaginable. Her attempt to destroy my inheritance had forced me to discover its true purpose, not just as personal property, but as a place where justice could flourish and communities could heal. The evening air carried sounds that would have made Grandpa proud. Cattle lowing peacefully in pastures they actually belonged in, children laughing as they learned to care for rescued goats, adults sharing stories and planning their own battles against petty tyranny. Vivian's downfall had exposed corruption that affected dozens of families, but it also proved that working people could fight back successfully when they had enough evidence and determination. Some things never change. There's always someone trying to steal what doesn't belong to them. But there's also always good people willing to stand up and fight for what's right.
Garrett sits on his grandfather's porch every evening now, listening to cattle settle in for the night. Same animals as 2 years ago, except now they got proper permits. And he doesn't have to pay $500 adoption fees to visit livestock on his own property. Here's what gets me about this whole thing. Vivian Ashworth stole $180,000 from Garrett's land while lecturing him about community standards. She built a criminal empire in his back pastures, then tried to force him out for bringing down property values. Audacity is breathtaking. But the scary part? She almost won. If Garrett hadn't found those old survey maps, if he had taken that $750,000 bite out and stayed quiet, she'd still be running her scam today. Makes you wonder how many other HOA presidents are getting rich of problems they created themselves. How many community improvements are actually just ways to steal from working folks who can't afford lawyers? You ever notice your HOA board members seem to profit every time they solve a neighborhood crisis? Tell me in the comments, because I guarantee you this is not the only one. Subscribe if you want to see more cases where people protecting your property values are the ones stealing them. Sometimes the biggest thieves wear the smallest badges.